And welcome back to the OHL podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Buckeye Boggs. That man over there is the wild man, Chris Wilds. And this, Chris, is our 2024 Team Up North preview. That's right. We're going to do them all 18 of them, even the team that the TCUN, the Cheaters Up North. We're gonna preview their team this year. It's a very interesting. They might be one of the more interesting teams to look at because I can see a pathway where they go 11-1, and I can see a pathway where the bottom drops off. And I'm not even talking about sanctions. I'm talking about a couple key injuries and the floor falls through for this team.
Yeah.
And that being said, it is going to be an incredibly interesting season for the Maize and Blue.
Yeah, I agree. And, I don't have them being the normal, power that everybody might think a defending national champion is. But, I'm with you. I could see an easy path that this team could go 11-1. And let me tell you, Eric, I would love to see both Ohio State and Michigan go into that game undefeated. I would.
I wouldn't. I want to see them lose every game if possible, man. But that's
but I'm just saying from a non-fan standpoint,
sure.
I would love to see that. From a fan standpoint, I want to see him get a mud hole stomped in him. I want to see Fresno State put it to boots to him.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, if you are a fan of the team up north and you are watching this preview, we are going to try to be completely as unbiased as possible, but please keep in mind, we are Buckeye fans.
And you're Cheaters!
And this is coming from our perspective. So, just keep that in mind. We are going to do our best. And I will say this. I invited multiple podcast hosts to come on to preview your team. And zero of them had the cojones to show up on the OHIO podcast to talk about their team. And I'm not even that mean. That tells me, Chris, that they don't want to answer questions that they're uncomfortable answering.
Yeah. Denial is not just a river in Egypt, man. They're living in it. They are living in denial. And they know what's coming. And they know how potentially ugly this season could get.
Let's take a look back on last year and previous seasons for those Cheaters from Ann Arbor. Last year they were 15-0, Chris, 9-0 in the Big Ten, 10-0 if you count the Big Ten championship game, which was a 26-0 joke in Indianapolis against a team that had no offense in Iowa. Closest game they had last season was a 6-point game at home against Ohio State. They had a 7-point win against Maryland the week before. They had a 9-point win against Penn State the week before that. And everything else was pretty much a pull-away win except for Alabama. They had a 7-point win there, an 11-point or 21-point win in the national championship game. Vegas last year said that they were a 10.5 win team. Chris, you had them at 10-2. I had them at 11-1. I stayed away from that bet. I'm guessing you did as well, given what you predicted they would do and where Vegas said they should land. So that being said, with the 15 wins last year overall, that increases their all-time winning record for the time being at 1,004 wins, 636 losses, and 43 ties. Of course, they do play in Michigan Stadium, which has 107,601 seats. Sharon Moore takes over the reins from one Jim Harbaugh. He has an overall record of 4-0 as a head coach, given what he did last year. 45 conference wins when you count the last 3 that I'm wondering if will stand or not. And 22-29 overall in the bowl games in the history of the team from Ann Arbor. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, I guess I'm a fan of the outhouse. I'm kind of excited because I know I'm going to get to watch my team win 1,000 games twice. That's a great thing they got going for them. All kidding aside, They were a physical team last year,
Yes, they
have been the
were.
last 3 years. Great defense. Now, whether that was because they knew what play was coming or not, I can't say. Um, and sufficient offense. They played the kind of ball that Jim Harbaugh wanted to play. They played it successfully. And, while I give them the asterisk beside that national title, which I do think will be taken away, uh, there's no denying that they've played good physical ball the last few years. And I think they're going to see a significant letdown this year, given all they've lost.
Okay, so since we couldn't find a expert from any of their podcasts who want to join us, I went to the next best thing, Chris. I went and got Zack Guggenheim from the Big Ten Football Talk podcast,
That's
and
pretty good.
he's a good dude. He knows his stuff when it comes to Big Ten football. He's also the co-host with JR over at the Big Ten Huddle. So he is all in on all 18 teams in the Big Ten. I figured if none of them are willing to talk to us about their team, and he's probably the next best thing. So this is about a 45, 50-minute interview, somewhere around in there. We had a lot of fun. You're going to enjoy this. When we're done, Chris and I will be back to talk schedule. We'll talk roster and schedule and give you our predictions. And welcome back to the OHIO podcast, everybody. You see, I'm now joined by our guest host, Zack Guggenheim from the Big Ten Football Talk. Now, Zack is wearing a Ohio State jersey, and if you follow Big Ten Football Talk, or you remember when Zack was a guest here on the OHIO podcast, Zack is a Buckeye fan. You might be asking, why am I having Zack as the guest interview for this portion of a Michigan preview? And it's because twofold. Number one, he knows more about Michigan than most of the Michigan guys on podcasts. And number two, they all refuse to join me. Apparently, my scarlet and gray colored glasses are just too strong for those in the maize and blue, Zach. So here you are, filling in for all of those wimps and scaredy cats up there in Ann Arbor to talk about their team. But thank you nonetheless, Zach, because like I said, you do know more about their team than most of them do.
Well, I appreciate the plug and the vote of confidence. I do feel like we're talking about the team up north, and I feel like I'm being set up. Not that you are setting me up, but I'm setting myself up to seem like the enemy of Ohio State country. So I'm like, I've got to wear a jersey to show that
Yes.
I bleed scarlet and gray, man. But I think the team up north is going to be pretty good. So I'm going to say some nice things about them, which
Yeah.
I might internally vomit a little bit, but that's okay. We'll get through it and we'll still
Yeah.
be friends afterwards.
Right, right. So I know a little bit from our conversation where you called into the call-in show a while ago, and I was like, "Oh, he's dropping some information on my lap that causes me to think he and I differ on some things with this
Hmm.
rival of ours."
Yes,
And that's good because I want to talk our way through that when we get to that portion of this interview
sure.
because I think it's good to have that counter argument with somebody. And so I'm prepared to do that. Not prepared to change your mind, but prepared for you to debate me on some things that I think are important for Ohio State fans to be realistic about.
Hmm.
That being said, let's start here. This is going to be three areas we're going to attack. We're going to attack storylines, roster, and then schedule and predictions pretty much. Let's start with storylines. The big one, obviously, new head coach. Jim Harbaugh is out. He's in the NFL, which is where he's wanted to be for years.
Hmm.
In is Sharon Moore, former offensive line, offensive coordinator, prepared for this moment. And taking aside all of the rumors and debate about whether he will truly be on the sideline this season or not, let's, for the sake of this video, let's say he is going to be on the sideline. He will be the acting coach for Michigan for the entirety of the season.
Hmm.
That being said, let's start there. Your thoughts on Sharon Moore getting the head coaching job for Michigan?
Yeah, so I had the privilege of talking with Andy and Jared over at out of the blue, then part of the Mason Brew podcast network, news network, and we were talking about that a little bit. Like, was he the right fit, or should they have gotten someone else? And probably the best comparison that I could put Sharon Moore to is Ryan Day in a lot of ways. Like, he knows that system. He's been involved. Uh, they're not changing a lot of the structure. And, he has just like Ryan Day did with Urban Meyer getting a 3-game suspension, Sharon Moore also had that. And so there is some good things that Sharon Moore brings to the table. He knows how to lead them on game day. He knows how to deviate from a game plan. We saw that with the infamous 32 straight runs at Penn State, which, people can debate whether that was a good thing or not. I thought it was a bad thing. They love it up in Ann Arbor, so to each his own. But the fact is, he did deviate. He knows how to turn on a dime a game plan when things aren't working. The big question mark for sure is, can he actually lead a program week to week? Because he did not have to do that, but neither did Ryan Day, right? Urban Meyer, I believe, if I remember in 2018, when Ryan Day had that 3-game stretch, he didn't have to deal with he didn't have to deal with the game prep. I'm pretty sure Urban could be there.
Right.
And it's same is true. So there's questions about, can Sharon Moore lead the whole program? And that remains to be seen. And he doesn't have the runway that Ryan Day had either. Like, Ryan Day, like, his first big game was Cincinnati and they clobbered them, right? Their first big game is Texas, and they're a national title favorite. The schedule is a lot more difficult his first year. And so there are questions whether he can lead the program. He doesn't have as much lead time to really get his feet wet with the whole package. But I think he's, at least in my opinion, he was the best hire out of anybody they could have had, right? Like, Kalen DeBoer wasn't available yet. And because of that, Jed Fish wasn't available, and I'm not sure he's the best fit anyway. And a lot of the other big names, I'm just not sure they're the right fit for Michigan. We've seen for the team up north, excuse me, I feel like I just swore on your show. I apologize. But the team up north, they've never done well with the splashy hire, right? Like, Rich Rod was awful because he didn't get the culture. Sharon Moore's been in the culture, and then he's got guys who have stayed on. I think it's Kirk Campbell, who's the OC coach, or OC. He was the quarterback's coach. Grant Newsome elevates the offensive coordinator spot. So they've got guys in the system. They're maintaining a lot of the same structure. The question is, can he handle being the head man the whole time?
Mm-hmm. To clarify, when you say system, you're talking about the
We're not talking about
offensive
Signgate. We're not talking about Connor Stallions. We're talking about,
Sorry.
yeah.
I had to do that.
Well, to be fair, we could be talking about that,
It could be.
but I'm talking about I'm thinking similar to when Urban left and you had the strength coach, you had all those guys in place. I think similarly, it's not wholesale changes. There are changes to key spots, but they're not wholesale changes.
They did lose a lot on coaching staff.
Yes.
Jim
Yes, they
Harbaugh
did.
took a lot. He did take the strength and conditioning coach with him as well.
That is true.
So there were some changes with that, but you are right. There were people who hung around, who stayed in place, and they even went out and got people who understand what they've been running.
Right.
Thinking about the defensive coordinator and things
Don
of that
Wink,
nature.
Wink Martindale.
Winkerdale.
I was
Wink
say
Martindale.
Don Winkendale. No, that's
Yeah.
it. Wink Martindale. Yeah.
Which is the same name as a guy from a game show host that I remember when I was a kid. I think there was a Wink Martindale during the day on doing game show stuff when I was younger. Anyways, I do want to touch real briefly on Connor Stallions.
Sure.
I do want to know, like, how much of what he was able to, and I'm going to use the word, instead of using the word get away with, which is what some people would say, but I'm going to use the word install. What he was able to install as a form of um, advantage for them.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that do you think lingers that they can still
Mm.
use to a degree? Um, Signs from other Big Ten opponents, that mindset of what can we do to give ourselves a leg up over the competition. Like, even though I think I can't stand the fact that he was able to accomplish such a thing, and I do feel that it is an advanced form of cheating, you got to give the guy credit. He broke the code on this thing to a degree no one else was willing to do,
Yep.
and it was wildly successful.
Yep. Yeah. It's a hard thing to quantify.
Right? You can't
And
really grade it. Like, how?
yeah. Well, and that's been my struggle throughout this whole thing is how much did it help them? And I feel like we will never know. I don't think that means you can't punish them. But and clearly you wouldn't go to those lengths if it wasn't doing anything.
Correct.
So you can't say, well, it did nothing. Everybody still signs. No one's ever done it to this degree. And so I think the question that you're asking is how much of that system is still lingering. And I think the reality is, I think the mindset could still be there if it's stayed with certain players and certain analysts that maybe weren't caught. And I don't want to go on a witch hunt here. But like it could be a thing. The reality is the game is changing because of the
Right.
headset and everything. But there's always, what if they can tap into the headset? What if they can tap? Not, and we're getting real, fishy, and I'm not actually going and saying being accusatory, but it's not like changes to try to stop people from cheating always results in innovation.
Yeah.
So like, do I think that do I think that Counter Stallions will ever be allowed to do anything for Michigan again, like officially? No. Do I think that there are probably things that that they or other teams might be doing to circumvent the new rules? Uh, yeah, because until you're caught, and I'm not saying I adhere to this, but this is, I think, how college athletics sadly has worked over the past, several decades is like, how do you find a loophole and expose it?
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that, which is why I think if the NCAA is worth anything, that they should come down hard on the team up north. Um, but that's because I think they've come down hard on other teams for things that I don't think have threatened the integrity of the game.
Yeah.
And this, whether fans of the team up north want to acknowledge it or not, the problem with that whole thing is it now forces you to question everything up until Connor Stallions is fired, and that means it also it extends to the rest of their success, which I've said multiple times. If they vacate the national championship, I don't really give a rip because I watch them win it. And at the same time, there is a bit of an asterisk there because what they built was essentially on a house of cards.
Right.
And so there's that both and, like, which is why if they were going to do anything, they should have. I'm going a little off script here, but they should have done something a year ago if they were going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you do something now, while I think punishment is still something. Consequences are needed, but the right consequence was to bar them from the tourney last year, and they didn't do that
Yeah.
because they're too slow.
Well, that's the story of my life with the NCAA. I mean, they've always been slow to everything. Which is why here I think in a few years the NCAA will be obsolete, or at
Yep.
least change to the degree that it'll be completely different than what you and I grew up with the NCAA. Those are a lot of the main headlines. Now I'm
Mhm.
gonna get to one more, and then before we move on to the roster, which will be a headline all of itself, the the idea that they are promoting that they are being overlooked this season, and that the fact that their ranking isn't high enough in their minds. Is this a real Is this another real thing? Is this another motivational thing? We are being, disrespected by the pundits and those with rankings and by the nation. Is this a whole is this something that we should actually be aware of because this is very motivating to them?
Uh,
Or is it
yeah.
realistic? Is this realistic?
Well, so I don't think it has to be realistic to us for it to motivate them. So, do I think it's realistic? No, I think they nailed maybe my only quibble would maybe reverse Penn State and the team up north. But even then, I'm like, I think Penn State has the easier pathway. But I have my own
Much so.
misgivings.
Hmm.
I have my own misgivings about Penn State this year.
Me too.
So but there's more known commodities at least overall at Penn
Hmm.
State. So I can understand why voters put them there. Um, I think they're ranked appropriately for what they lose because there are question marks. But in terms of motivation, just like a year ago, a lot of the stuff that they were using to motivate themselves was dumb because it's like you cheated and you got caught red-handed, right? And regardless of what you think, Jim Harbaugh should have known, at the very least, should have known. Doesn't matter. They were motivated by it. And I think that's actually the mark of a good coach is you can use anything to motivate, right? And Urban did that, right?
Sure.
So does it matter if we think it's garbage? No. Is it garbage? Yes. So it's a both and though.
Okay. Finally, the last storyline that I've been able to kind of put my thumb on is something that is a lot of people are talking about this season is the fact that this roster still pretty good,
Yes.
at least on paper from the starters. Now, here's where I think you and I are going to differ greatly, and we'll get
Mm-hmm.
in, and this will kind of set the stage for the rest of this conversation. I think Michigan is very top heavy on their roster, meaning they have a lot of good players remaining who are starters, but behind that is and you use your term here, a house of cards on this roster.
Mm.
And if they endure an injury or two on the defensive side of the football, I could see this thing getting away from them rather quickly because the style in which they play forces the defense to be solid for the entire football game. And if the defense cannot hold up that end of the bargain, given the way this team wants to be ran offensively, they can lose a lot of games, close games that they're in that they shouldn't be in because
Mm-hmm.
of how they play their style of game. So to me, they've been kind of flirting with disaster for a while, given that. And given their advantages that they had with Connor Stallions and what they were doing, I think that gave them the ability to go over the edge and win those close games. I think back a couple years ago against Illinois, they should have lost that football game.
Mm-hmm.
They had a better roster, but the style of play led them right into a close game against Illinois that they had to pray to the football gods to get out of by the skin of their teeth, right?
Yeah.
Um, there's been a lot of examples that way. And
Yeah.
and so I think if you take away that advantage they had, and again, given the fact that they do have some really good players still that have a lot of experience, but if some of those guys go down,
Mm-hmm.
this could be a eye-opening experience for a lot of fans of the Maize and Blue.
Yeah, it's funny. So my projection of them is if everyone stays healthy. I
Okay.
think what you're hitting on is and so whenever I think of like what could a team be and all that stuff, I'm looking for pathways. And so I actually we might be on the same wavelength, at least from what you're describing, at least from a conceptual level. but I think there's multiple pathways to get to certain places. And so I think the roster there are significant questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, so one of the things I would not commit to is their ceiling national championship? No. And the depth and quarterback are the two reasons why. Can this team get to the playoff? Absolutely. Because they have the best defensive tackle combo in the country. And that's going to cure a lot of ills. I think Josiah Stewart on the edge is one of the better rushers, edge rushers. You know, they got Jarshawn Barham out of Maryland, who I think is going to be a real one for them at linebacker. You know, the secondary, there's question marks, but they filled some of those holes with transfers. You know, Will Johnson is going to erase whoever the number one corner is, or number one wide receiver is. Makari Page is a good safety back there. They got Wesley Walker out of Georgia Tech, who had a good run at Georgia Tech for 3 years. So there's talent here, but it's the depth, and that's the real question mark. But I think, unlike other teams, you know, they don't just have high level guys. Like Will Johnson's going to be a top 5, top 10 pick. Mason Graham's going to be a top 5 pick.
Well, see, I'm going to push back. Here's where we're going to start disagreeing. I'm going to push back,
and that's
on you a
okay.
little bit.
Go for it.
So Will Johnson's getting incredibly, way too much hype, in my opinion. Did you know? And I have been banging this all summer long. Did you know Denzel Burke has better statistics than Will Johnson? Meaning this, Denzel Burke's receptions allowed versus attempts his direction is half of what Will Johnson's is.
Really?
Yes. Now, granted, Will Johnson does have more takeaways, but that goes without saying. You're going to have more opportunities to get more takeaways if they're throwing the football your way more often.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's, to me, and when you look at the ranking of, like, and just taking that one statistic, attempts versus completions as a cornerback, when you look at that statistic, he's actually closer to David Igbinosun than he is Denzel Burke. And I'm like, guys, why are you, like, you're like prepping or like pushing this guy up to be like, he's the greatest corner in college. He's not. That's one of the things that I have an issue with, because I think sometimes the media that's in Ann Arbor will push certain narratives that the team or school wants them to push, and it gets out there in the ethos of the national media, and it's not true. J.J. McCarthy's a great quarterback. Minnesota's well, first off, he's injured. So sorry about that. But I think Minnesota's going to find out that wasn't true.
Yeah. And you very well could be right. I will say this. I think Will Johnson is one of 5 or 6 really good corners in this league.
I actually agree with you on that. In fact, he was second string. He was second team all Big Ten in our rankings, meaning the consensus among us Buckeye fans, he was one of the top 4 corners in the league.
Yeah,
which makes sense, but
yeah, which I think and going to your point about Burke, I think you could make a really strong argument that the top 4 corners in the league are Denzel Burke, Davison Igbinosun, Jordan Hancock, and Will Johnson. Now, I think you had Jabbar Muhammad, who I think is another, like, really good corner.
Really good.
Yeah, really good corner. But, like, so I would agree with you that I think you can debate who the best corner is. I think in terms of measurables, that's probably where the draft type is coming. Although I would argue, I think Igbinosun is in for a huge push. I think his length, Will Johnson, he's 6'2", 206 pounds. I mean, that's a long corner. But you look at Igbinosun, let me just look it up here. Like, Igbinosun is almost as long, if not just as long as him. Let's see. He's 6'2", 193. So you're talking about 2 guys who I think from a measurability standpoint are very unique. And I think
Hmm.
that's where a lot of the hype is coming from. Certainly Ann Arbor's pushing them because, you know, they do that.
Right.
But
And that's kind of been my point is that I
yeah,
think a lot of this hype is just that. Because statistically, Denzel Burke had a better season.
yeah,
And
yeah. Well, what I would still say though, this is so let's take the conversation of Burke versus Johnson and set that to the side. I would still say you have Johnson as a pretty good cornerstone in that back in that secondary,
I
right?
agree. I agree.
Yeah. So we can maybe quibble over best, second best, and I'm okay with that because
Sure.
I would just like I would say I think the defensive tackles are the best in the country for Michigan. I don't think there's a doubt in my mind that the secondary, and I mean not just the whole secondary, but the corners at Ohio State, it's no one's better than Ohio State.
So I'm going to make a statement, and you tell me true or false and why.
Hmm.
Michigan's success this season will be because their defense is successful, which is because their defensive line is that great.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yeah, I
So,
think it's true.
so if there is an injury or two on that defensive line, it falls apart. True or false?
It depends on what you mean by falls apart. Like, are we saying like missing a bowl game? Are we saying like 7-5? What would be falling
I'm
apart?
saying like they end up going 8-7-5, 8-4.
Yeah, I think because there's enough games. So my thoughts on them really do they really hang on that defensive tackle duo wreaking havoc
Okay.
because Texas. I don't think they're going to beat Texas. I think it's too early in the season. But like the thing that could give Texas trouble is interior line pressure.
Well, Texas isn't going to be able to run the football on them now. Texas is already
Yeah,
on their third string running back
yeah, and
for the
that's
season.
yeah,
But I don't think Texas was going to go in there thinking they could run the football. They got Quinn Ewers. They've got athletic wide receivers. They are going to take the Ohio State blueprint of we're going to throw the football all over you and keep you running side to side, and
yeah,
then they're going to load the box defensively. Is I think the
yeah,
blueprint for Texas to beat them.
and I think that's a good blueprint. My one pushback there, and I think it's the pathway for all their games. I think interior line pressure to the quarterback
Hmm.
is just. I mean, you saw it against Alabama. We saw it against Ohio State. That's a lot of how they made their hay, and they really stifle you. And so that combined with the secondary, the rebuilt secondary, again, I think their linebackers are a bit underrated. But the defensive line is that's the linchpin. And I think you're
Yeah.
right. If they can't get pressure, and like Josiah Stewart's a great piece, I think Moore is on the other side of them. Both are really good, but if they can't go, and they're not able to, if one of them goes down, I think that does become really problematic. Particularly, I think Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State.
Hmm.
Now, I will say this about Oregon. I have Michigan beating Oregon at this point, but it's not necessarily because Michigan is great. Sorry, team up north. Oregon has its own issue where they have to travel from west to east coast 3 times in 4 weeks. And that's going to be its own bear.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that their roster, like, I think their roster is really good. I'm not, like, I'm a little skeptical about how great their roster is. And I think it's good enough to beat Ohio State at home. So, like, I think it's really, really good. But the travel that they're going to have to deal with and the fatigue is another thing that it's one of the reasons why I have the team up north in the Big Ten championship game. It's not because I think they're better than Oregon. It's because I think Oregon has a difficulty of their own, which is they travel out of the top 5. I think they travel the most out of any of the top 5 teams in the Big Ten, and that's significant. Like I don't
Yeah.
think people recognize that that's a struggle. So that's part of my projection with the team up north is it's not just about them. It's about what other teams have to endure maybe for the first time. And
Hmm.
like Oregon's never had to do that.
Right. No, that's a good point. And if you think their travel's bad, look at UCLA's.
Well, yeah, they're UCLA.
Gosh.
Someone just someone just asked, "What do you make of LSU, Oregon, and the third team they're playing?" I think it's Penn State. Maybe it's those three in a row. And I just put the GIF of Mr. T and Rocky 3 prediction
Pain.
pain. That's gonna be terrible.
Well, as long as they remember that they are a team, it's located in Los Angeles, they will be fine. They'll find their way home. They'll be all right. They'll get home to the sunny shores of LA.
Listen, I as much as and I think UCLA is in for a bad year, but the way that Deshaun Foster owned that, I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I like what are you gonna do with
Respect.
that? But I was
Yeah.
like, wear a t-shirt to
Hey,
press conference.
yeah. Wear a t-shirt and start selling that merch, baby. That's how you do it. There you go. All right. So we agree that the defensive side of the roster is really good. Now
Mhm.
let's turn to the other side because you
Yes.
you actually brought up the offense, and I think at this point what I'm hearing is that at quarterback there's a very good chance that Jack Tuttle gets the nod over Alex Orji to start the season.
Yes. Yes. So I joked on the Big Ten huddle that I think what's going to happen is he's the quarterback till Texas, and then he's going to do his best Joe Bowserman impression, and uh, and then they're gonna be like, we can't win with one of these. Uh, I I think if Tuttle is the quarterback the whole season, then that's danger.
That's
Like
bad.
I think we're talking maybe not just 8-4. I think we're talking maybe 6-6.
Oof.
Because here's the thing about Orgy is while he is raw as a passer, he can do a lot with his legs,
Yeah, he's dynamic. He's athletic.
and that can cause. I mean, even for a defense like Ohio State will figure out how to shut him down eventually, but like Tuttle is just not good. And now he has experience. Um, he's experienced in failing, which I guess is experience. So, and he might come out and surprise
Listen,
us.
listen. I took 4 years of Spanish and got through Spanish 3 in 4 years. That doesn't mean I can speak it. It's a lot of experience.
Yep.
Doesn't mean I'm good at it. Okay.
Yep.
All
Yep.
right.
Um,
See.
see,
uh,
senor.
yeah. All right. Donovan Edwards.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that there's a Madden cover court curse for the NCAA game here
Yep.
with him, but I'm not so sure. Just like the quarterback position, he's going to end up with the most carries when this thing's all said and done for them.
Yeah, I would actually agree with you on that. I think Khalil Mullings is going to be a nuisance for teams. 6'1", 230-pound power back. The other guy that's getting some run, unfortunately for us as Buckeye fans, is Jordan Marshall, who's a true freshman. They're very high on him. Apparently, he's done really well in camp. I think Edwards certainly has a role. I think you're probably talking 10 to 15 carries a game for him and a lot of work out of the backfield. But I would not be surprised if he is. I think Curtis Samuel is a good comp in some ways. I wouldn't say that he's like exactly like him. I think Samuel had much better wide receiver instincts than Edwards does, but he's very good out of the backfield and a good receiver. You can shift out wide. But I don't think the pathway for them is just to run him 30 to 40 times a game. I think it's a three back set, three backs that you're rotating through. I think Mullings is the guy who's at the goal line who you're just like, please stop running him. Yeah, I think those are the guys that those are the top three right now for them.
Is Colston Loveland quietly the best guy on this team, at least offensively?
He's certainly the first round pick on this team. Like he's a very good tight end, good blocker, great receiver, and I think he's one of the reasons why I'm. I wouldn't say I'm not concerned about quarterback, but it's why I'm like I think whoever the quarterback is, he's so good, and he is a safety blanket between him and Edwards. You have two guys who are close to the line of scrimmage, who can really bail you out, and so and that's been the pathway. Even with JJ,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't need a guy to be, super
Marvin Harrison
Superman.
Jr., right?
Yeah, and that's why like I'll go back to 2021 as well, and I know there's asterisks that we have to consider. But remember, Cade McNamara was the quarterback for them, and they went 11-1 that year.
He
And
might not even win the starting job in Iowa this year.
yeah, like it's not. I mean, he was, and I mean Iowa. I think Iowa and Michigan team up north might. See, I'm so used to being on my show where I'm like,
Yeah,
I
you
can't
can
say.
you can say it's
No, I feel
fine.
like
This is a preview,
it's a preview.
So
I know, but like I feel like I gotta wash my mouth out with soap after this. This is your fault, Eric. It's your fault.
see,
Uh,
you don't have to worry about going and confessing your sins to any priest or something by saying the name. Just go get yourself some Anthony Thomas Buckeyes. Down those, you'll be
uh,
fine.
see,
It'll
my
bring it all back
wife,
for you.
my wife makes homemade Buckeyes.
Oh, white. Have you ever had white chocolate Buckeyes?
No,
Oh,
ooh,
it's really good.
I
It's
might. We
really good.
might. So October 12th, we are doing a whole watch party open house because you have USC and Penn State, and I live in Penn State country, um, and obviously Ohio State, Oregon. I might have to convince her to make some white chocolate Buckeyes
Oh,
now.
it's
This
well worth
is
it. It's well worth it.
this is good.
One last question about the roster.
Yes.
They are replacing five starters on the offensive line.
Yes. Yeah.
I have zero doubts that they're going to find some future NFL guys on this roster
Hmm.
to be on that offensive line. I think Sherrone Moore does develop extremely well. And if
Yep.
there's one position that I am confident in that they're always going to have some dudes in, at least in the last 6, 7, 8 years, it seems like offensive line has been where it's at.
Yes.
So all this talk about, well, they're replacing five offensive linemen. Yes, I understand that. They are going to have some guys. However, they are replacing five starting offensive linemen. And
Hmm.
if there's one question I've got about that, it's chemistry.
Yes.
Is this and should this be a concern, and why are they not talking about it in Ann Arbor?
Yeah, I think there's probably two reasons why they're not talking about it in Ann Arbor. One, I think is just that they're used to rotating guys. Like, I mean, they rotated 8 or 9 guys in a year ago. And so some of these guys even have starting experience. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why. I think the second is I think they are confident that they will gel in the second half of the season. If you look at their first 6 games, it's not easy. But Fresno State, Fresno State's not an easy group of 5 team, but it's a group of 5 team. They should win that game.
And they have a new head coach.
Yeah. Texas is Texas. They're probably going to lose that one. Then it's Arkansas State. USC is a big question mark. And I think they're going to be better than a year ago, at least comparable to in their performance. I don't know if their record's going to be better because their schedule is insane.
It's brutal.
And I'm not sold that USC's line or defense, even with the quarterback questions, I don't know if they are going to be up to the task. I think Minnesota's improved, but it's at home. And then they go to Washington, and you want to talk about roster turnover. Oof. Washington is in much worse shape, I think, than the team up north. And then you get a bye, and then you're at Illinois. I think Illinois is going to struggle a bit this year. Michigan State is a year or two away from actually getting back to where they want to be. And then you get Oregon in November. And then it's Oregon and Ohio State in November. And so I think that's where a lot of the confidence is coming is that, yes, you have hard games in that first 6, but they're like, aside from Texas, they're manageable. Now, will they come out 5-1? I think that's the big question. Can they get past? I think the 2 key games, I actually don't think Washington is a key game for them, even though I think Washington will be, they still have talent. They got Will Rogers out of the portal.
It's a tricky away game, is what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
That crowd is going to be ruckus. They are going to make a difference. Will
Yeah.
it be enough of a difference to make it a close game? Now, Jed Fish has got some guys coming from Arizona with
Arizona.
him
Yeah.
that are legit, but I'm with you. I think it's going to take him a season or two to say, "Hey, we're ready to compete in the Big Ten."
Yeah.
At the upper level. I think they still go to a bowl game this year, even his first
Yep.
year.
Yeah, I agree.
But I'm with you on that. So
Yeah.
since since you already started it, let's go ahead and dive into this a little bit because you brought up those first 5 games. Fresno State is not an to me. It's kind of like when Notre Dame uh, played Marshall a couple years ago. Like Marshall's pretty good. Ohio
Mhm.
State's gonna have them on their roster this year, like on their schedule this year. You should beat them.
Mhm.
Mess around and find out type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
This thing's close in the fourth quarter. Fresno's not gonna back down on you.
Mhm.
But and then you have the big one with Texas. Arkansas State should be a dub. Here's my early prediction. Tell me if I'm right or wrong with this. The team that loses between USC and Michigan, their season or chances of getting college football playoff are done that day. If you lose that game, you're not going to make it. Like that is to me that is a huge measuring stick for both teams. Because if they lose the
Yeah.
Texas and then they lose the USC, uh-oh.
Yeah. Oof, that's a good. Let me look at the schedule here for USC. I mean, I think so. Here's where I would. I think from a momentum standpoint, most likely. Um, I'm not going to commit to it because I think both USC and the team up north have the schedules to make it in at 9-3 because of the difficult like
What if
that.
I told you that there will be no 9-3 team make the college football playoff in the first year?
Then I would say they're done.
Because I think you're going to have at least 2 or 3 teams, maybe 4,
Mhm.
between the Big 12 and the ACC have 10-2 records or 11-1 records and not win their conference. How
Yeah.
do you keep them out especially if they have 2 less losses than a 9-3 team?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's part of the reason why I don't like how we've done the
Yeah,
system is
right.
I
And then you got to take into the fact that there's going to be at least 5 from the SEC.
yeah,
I legitimately think they get 5 in the first year. I think you got Bama, Georgia. I think you're going to have Ole Miss. I think you're going to have, and I'm missing an obvious one that I worked this
Texas.
out. Texas, thank you. And then I think you're going to have a Tennessee or LSU, somebody who's
Yeah.
going to have that. Like, if there's going to be a 9-3 team, it's right there.
Yeah. There's another team in the SEC that I think has a really good shot to make the playoff, and it's Mizzou.
Oh shoot, yeah. How do I gotta forget? They have a
Yeah.
simple schedule too.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this, yeah. Thank you, Missouri. There you go.
Yeah.
So you have those 5 teams. I think you have Ohio State. I think you have Oregon. Um, maybe a Penn State. He's going to be at 10-2,
Mhm.
11-1. So I think this is a huge, huge game for both those
Yeah.
teams.
Yeah. I would agree. I think again, I think it's gonna be interesting how it shakes out with the Big 12 and the ACC, and obviously you have the Group of Five team. Uh, and I think there is some there's certainly SEC bias. I'll say this: I do like the team up north in that game, just because I trust. the line play more. And I think us. Well, let me say this: out of USC, Minnesota, and Washington, I like USC and Minnesota's pathways to victory more than Washington. I actually think I like Minnesota's pathway better than USC's.
I'm
Um,
actually with you on that one too.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, second half of the schedule: at Illinois, Michigan State, Oregon, the home game against Oregon you mentioned, at Indiana, bye week, and then home game against Northwestern. That they
Hmm.
come down 23 to at Ohio State. All right. So that being said, I know what your prediction is. This is for your opportunity to try to tell me and talk me into how you came up with this prediction and why.
Yeah.
Um, I don't see it.
Yeah.
I don't believe it. I don't want I don't want to believe it.
Yeah.
But all right, explain to everybody how in the world you have them playing for a Big Ten championship and getting to a college football playoff.
Yes. It might. I'll be very honest. It might very well be my reverse bias because I'm terrified of a fourth loss to the team up north. Um, I think the best pathway to wins is defense and running game. I think those are the two things that travel. And I think as I see their schedule, I think it's a hard schedule for sure. But I think so, I think Texas is 99% a loss. But I think they beat USC. I think they beat Minnesota. I think they beat Washington. And then I think the two other very very much losable games for them in the back half of the schedule is Oregon and Ohio State. I don't think they get Ohio State this year. It's funny in my second draft I actually picked the team up north over Ohio State. And I think that was my reverse bias because I just feel like I've been burned every time the past 3 years that I've picked Ohio State over the team up north preseason. I'm like, I just don't think I can do it. But I just didn't think Oregon was going to get out unscathed. And so a lot of it was, okay, where do I think Oregon is going to lose? Because I think Oregon actually beats Ohio State in Autzen, which I think, if I remember correctly, I think you had as well.
Mhm.
But that 4 game, 5 game stretch where they're traveling over and over again, and I'm like, I'm not sure they get out of those away games undefeated.
So how you get Michigan to Indy is not so much Michigan as it is Oregon.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. That's an interesting take. You're the first person I've really heard go down that pathway, and I think that's smart on you to really take that into account. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not there. I do think Oregon's just a better football team who's more dynamic and explosive than
Hmm.
Michigan is, and that's gonna get them. But um, I also believe that karma's going to catch up with this football team a little bit this year,
And
and
I think that's very possible too.
I do think that they're going to get beat up, and by the time they get to Columbus, they've got two L's on their somewhere on their schedule already, and they're physically beat up. And Ohio State is going to be, hey, we've been playing most of our starters half the games this year, and we are ready for this. And there's going to be blood to pay,
Yeah.
and it's going to be a totally different world for them
Yeah.
without given Ohio State's roster, given where Ryan Day's at, I think mentally in his head,
Hmm.
um, and then just the expectations of this team. So I have an 11-1 Oregon and 11-1 Ohio State doing battle again in Indianapolis, with Ohio State coming on top this time around.
Yeah.
With Ohio State's one loss coming, in Eugene, where uh, I think Michigan's going to be looking at staring 3 or 4 losses in the face this season.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
which
that's yeah.
in
I think
all
it's very
honesty,
fair.
I can see your scenario playing out. I can also see my scenario playing out. Like I think that, like I do believe that there is a world in which 11-1 is possible for them. But I also think
Mhm.
there's a world where 7-5 is
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
So, and that's where I kind of have their floor is 7-5. I kind of have their ceiling 11-1. Now, are you going to disagree and say no? The floor can be lower, or can you say no, Eric? The ceiling can be higher here.
So I'll actually say I think the floor can be lower, and the reason I think the pathway for that is injuries
Hmm.
and also just abysmal quarter. Like if the quarterback play is just on like
Yeah.
if Jack Tuttle really is Joe Bowserman and they can't get anybody else, then it is bad for two reasons. One is just I don't know how they're going to move the ball, and then two, you have enough teams, and this is actually honestly the hardest thing for me. I've done this exercise now 3 years, like doing a game by game of every Big Ten team.
Hmm.
I have never had a harder time. I did it 3 times because each time I did it the first 2 times, I'm like, I don't like this. It just didn't make sense because I'd have Wisconsin at 5-7, and I'm like, I don't think they're a 5-7 team. But like, how do I? So I just was really struggling because I had to factor in travel and new teams in the conference. I think the team up north, their floor could be lower because the things we were saying about USC, Minnesota, Washington, even Illinois. Like I think the team up north has a better roster than all those teams, but their rosters have gotten better.
Hmm.
And if they're like they can be exploited if they lose guys if they go down for injury. So like I think there's a scenario. I'm not picking this scenario, but there's a scenario where they're 2-4 after their first 6 games. Like
And the world is burning down in Ann Arbor.
yeah. Now I'm not saying that. Like I would put
Gosh,
that
I'd
at
love to see it though.
I would too. But like I think it's a 1% chance.
Yeah.
But like if Mason Graham goes down week 1 and Will Johnson goes down week 2, I hope they don't. By the way, like I would hate that. And Jack Tuttle is let's throw it into the stands again and let's just throw it to this defensive back. Then I do think you're talking missing a bowl game. But I think that pathway is very slim.
Yeah. Okay. 11-1, or do you think that there is a chance they could go 12-0 again?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. I I have them at 10 and I have it at 10-2. Um and I think 11-1 is I think that is the ceiling cuz I just don't know how they get past Texas week 2. Um
If
I
they do, if they beat Texas week 2, that's I think it was who was I watching who talked about that? Who basically said if they beat Texas in week 2, it's on like Donkey Kong. Like that's going to change everything, the perspective, everything surrounding the team, who they are, and what people think about them. And it was Joe Klatt. Joe Klatt said it. I
yeah.
think Joe Klatt
Yeah.
said if they can beat Texas in week 2 like that, it's at that point, it's watch out, Michigan. They're a national contender.
Yeah. And I'll say that I know Joel Klatt, he's not everybody's cup of tea. He saw Michigan up close and he I really value his insight and if he's high on them, that's forget the folks in Ann Arbor. Although the guys out of the Blue podcast, they're awesome. Um, but everybody else, like forget them. If Joel Klatt is talking high about you, he knows what he's talking about. And he he's not going to blow smoke. And I think that's what has my attention is he and a few other guys who I really respect. They've seen this roster and they've seen this team and they're like, I don't think the demise is as I don't think it's here yet. But I do think there's a I don't know if there's a way they can go 12-0
Okay.
with the issues that we talked about.
Well, there's a saying, and I believe this saying very. It's one of the reasons why I get in trouble on social media. Is twofold. One is Buckeye fans who think I why am I bringing this up and talking about them, and the other being is I'm just opening myself to scrutiny from the fans from the team up north. But I really believe that you keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Hmm.
And so outside of what's happening at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center in Columbus, Ohio, I probably know more what's going on in Ann Arbor than any other team in the Big Ten, simply because my eyes are on them the most out of any team that we play in the Big Ten. And so, given that, I'm not surprised at all with what you brought to the table today, Zach. And I think that your insights were, and your opinions were valid. And so will I say that you've changed my mind on my prediction? No, because we're only one game off from each other.
Yep.
And one game could literally be one play
Hmm.
here or there. And given, just the game in which we played today. And there will be plenty of opportunities for you and I to do more during the season, chatting and coming together and talking Ohio State and crazy theories and, and everything else that I like to bring up when I'm on your show and whatnot. And of course, there's a whole slew of them that we could talk about that you and I haven't discussed lately. But
Hmm.
and that being said, I really do appreciate you coming on, Zach. Where can everybody find the Big Ten Football Talk at?
Yeah, so we're on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Those are the three main places. I'm sure it's other places too, but those are the three main places. So definitely go there, like, subscribe, and then I'm on X. I'm on Instagram, but I'm not really on Instagram a ton. X is kind of the main place you can
Yeah.
find me on social media. So
Beautiful. Go check them out, guys. Great show, great podcast. We'll have Zach back on as a special guest again. Hopefully next time he won't have to be the Michigan expert for us. He can just be Zach for the Big Ten Football Talk guy. But hey, Zach, thanks for playing along, man. And I tell you what, you are the best dressed Michigan man I've ever seen.
that's I think that's a compliment, but thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach.
Yep.
And welcome back to the OHO podcast. Thank you very much, Zach, for coming on and talking with me about the team up north. And it wasn't easy for us, but we did it. We swallowed our pride, and we did what we had to do for you, the fans. Okay, Chris, let's take a look at this roster that they've got going on up there in Ann Arbor. Let's take a look at the offense first. So we're going to pull up the Our Lads page here. Um, Obviously, quarterback is something to be interesting. Is it going to be Jack Tuttle? Is it going to be Alex Orji? Is it going to be a combination of both of them? I don't know. That is obviously a big storyline. The turnover on the offensive line, big storyline. 5 new starters. Transferred Josh Preby or however he pronounces his name. Grad transfer. He's got experience. Miles Hinton, he played a lot. He's in there now. They've got guys, they've got dudes. They have been developing, but now can they get that chemistry as 5 new starters? But really, the offensive weapon on this team is at the tight end position in Colston Loveland. And when you look at the wide receivers, Frederick Moore, Tyler Morris, Samaj Morgan, none of those names strike fear into me as an opponent. But Loveland, he's the real deal, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it right there, Eric. Loveland is really their only offensive threat. Now, people are going to say, "Oh, what about Donovan Edwards?"
I don't even know that he's their best running back.
I don't know he's their best running back, but I do know he's most likely to get broken. The guy he's not. In a team that talked so much about toughness, this is the guy that isn't.
Well,
Uh,
but it's hard for us to say when he did run right through our hearts, 2 times in a row.
well,
So
it's not hard for me to say, Eric, because I'll tell you what. All you got to do is look at the guy. He's frail. He's not a tough kid. And this is the thing. He can put up numbers. If he has open field opportunities, he's great. But I'm telling you, I don't think he can take the beating of being the number one back and taking all the carries. I just don't. Um, But
I don't
Loveland,
think I don't know that they're going to expect him to either, though, is the thing. Like
yeah,
I do think that they're going to kind of use a two-back system again, maybe even a three-back system.
maybe. But I do think that Loveland, he's legit, no doubt about it.
Hmm.
Most likely the best tight end in the country. He's that good. He can block. He can catch. The guy can go vertical and get deep. He is a great player. Other than that, the offensive weaponry is not good, and no matter how much they've done as far as getting guys for the offensive line and having some experience, the big thing is they don't have a lot of starting experience. This group hasn't had time to gel. That's going to take some time for this team, uh, and that's something that I think is going to be an issue for them. And the fact that if they've got one or two choices, they can go with Jack Tuttle at quarterback, who has experience, um, but he's a statue, or you go with Alex Orji, who can move the ball and run the ball, uh, but can't complete a pass over 10 yards. Now, he's got an arm, don't get me wrong. The kid's got a cannon. He's got no accuracy.
Right.
So, I mean, they are in a bad situation at quarterback. So, I don't know that this offense is going to score a whole lot of points, to be honest, especially considering, as we'll talk about here in a few minutes, it's not like last year where they had that schedule that was soft as a baby's bottom. These guys have one of the tougher schedules in the country this year.
They do. They do. Let's take a look at the defense, guys. So defensively, this is definitely the strength of this football team. And it starts up the middle on the defensive line. And Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, they're not too bad on the outside either. Rashawn Benny is definitely a weapon. Josiah Stewart. And then everybody's pretty high on Jayshon Barham, the transfer from Maryland at linebacker. He's also dealt with some injuries history as well, so we'll see. And then, of course, Derek Moore. The defensive backfield, everybody's so high on Will Johnson. Makari Page is another good name. And I had this debate that you all just heard with Zack about Will Johnson, and I just feel like the dude is getting way too much hype from that media in Ann Arbor, and the national media's ran with it. His numbers aren't nearly as good as some other guys in this country, including in this conference right here in Columbus, Ohio. And so, are they good? Is this a good defense? Yes. But I'm going to stress it again, Chris. This is a defense that is a couple key injuries away from watching their season fall apart, because Sharon Moore and this coaching staff are going to lean on this defense to get them where they want to go this season. Because offensively, if they're going to try to play smash ball again, teams are going to load the box and dare Orji to throw the football, if indeed that's the quarterback that they choose, or the other guy. At least with Orji, he's a threat to run the football. I just think Michigan better get used to winning low-scoring, close football games. And if that's the formula they're going to use, again, a couple injuries away from that defense being gassed by the end of the games, and they could lose some of those games that they've won in the past.
Yeah, this defense on the surface, this looks like a great defense, Eric. It really does. Gant and Graham, two of the better interior defensive linemen in the country. They are good, but these are also guys who did not play, I would say, significant downs last year as far as significant number. They had a very good rotation last year, which kept these guys from having to play a ton of ball. They also didn't play in a lot of fourth quarters last year because these guys were usually up. So we're going to see what it's like for them when they got to be out there for four quarters. And I agree with you. I think this is a team that's going to get gassed. Will Johnson, I completely agree with you. Completely overrated. Is he good? Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, he's one of the four best cornerbacks in the conference. I'm not saying he's not really good.
He's
He's
definitely a
not.
top 5 guy.
And all these people are saying he's going to be a top 5 NFL draft pick.
He's not.
What are they watching?
He's not. He is just not that good. I think that you could see. I definitely think you see Denzel Burke go before this guy in the draft, if not 2 or 3 other guys within the conference. This is he's overrated, and this is how bad it is, Eric. You talked about key injuries on defense. They can't handle taking a loss to anyone in that front 7. I honestly believe they could overcome losing Will Johnson. I don't think it would be good. I don't think it'd be pretty.
They don't want to.
They
Right?
don't want to, but I think they could overcome losing Will Johnson. I don't think they can overcome losing Gant, or losing Graham, losing Josiah Stewart. They lose those guys. This is a team that is in a lot of trouble because, like you said, if I'm Sharon Moore right now, I'm picking up the phone and I'm making a call to Kirk Ferentz and saying, "Hey, buddy, how have you been doing this for 114 years?" Because that's the way he's going to have to win these games.
And this
He's got no offense.
I think this very well is going to look very similar to an Iowa season for them.
Yeah, they got no players on offense. They got a good tight end.
Very
got a
similar.
Good defense, but no depth.
Yeah, and they're going to be in over their heads against the better teams.
Yes.
It's kind of how I see it going. All right, let's take a look at this schedule. You alluded to it here in a couple weeks. August 31st, Fresno State comes a knocking. And then the big one on September 7th, Texas. Now, this is a depleted backfield that Texas is bringing in. They're on the third string running back. But this is a Texas offense that is going to be very good, led by quarterback Quinn Ewers. A passing attack that gave Alabama fits. If Texas can score, given the athleticism they have on defense, I think Michigan's in trouble. September 14th, Arkansas State. And then I'm circling this, and just like I spoke with Zack, I'm circling this game on September 21st. I think either USC or Michigan will be eliminated from the college football playoff that week.
Yeah.
That early. That is a huge game. Do not sleep on Minnesota or traveling to Washington. Minnesota is an improved football team who's going to play a very similar style of football to you, who has, in my opinion, a better offensive line. Plus, they have more experience at the quarterback position. And they have a better wide receiver on their roster.
Better coach.
That remains to be seen.
Does it, though?
Yes, it does. October 5th, they travel for the first time. They go away from the friendly confines of the outhouse, and they go to Washington. That is a tough place to play. Should they win that football game? Yes, they should. They have a better roster. But the health of that roster, coupled with the fact that when your first away game in a very hostile environment, that could be an interesting game. Bye week, travel on the road again at Illinois. This is a team that's given them trouble in the past. Burt knows how to play against them. And then rivalry number 1 for them, Sparty comes a knocking. And then another big one, home on November 2nd against Oregon. I believe this is another L for the team up north. At Indiana, that should be a win. Then their second bye week, they host Northwestern. And then they're at Cbus. This is going to be a big game for the Buckeyes. It's not November 25th. It's November 30th. My apologies. There's my one mistake on these that I've made. And that should be another L for them. I think Ohio State's going to finally get that win. So, the over-under, Chris, Vegas says this is a 9.5 win team. I've got them sitting at 9-3, 7-2 overall. Chris, you're exactly the same as me. JR's got them 8-4, 6-3 in the Big Ten. He's got them with one more L than what you and I have.
And I agree with that.
I'm guessing you gave them L's against Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I thought so. So let me pull you back up on the screen here. My apologies for that. Here we go. I don't know how else to say this to them. I think the realistic and honest fans of that team that we have spoke to, Burks, Blue Wolverine, they're looking at 9-3 as a very real possibility. That's what I see as well. I think people, when they're realistic and they look at this, say, yeah, there's probably 3 L's on this schedule. And I've been saying it for a while. There's not a lot of depth on this team. If things get swirly early on, let's say they take an L against USC and Texas, it is not out of the realm of possibility. This team ends up going 6-6 on the season.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that because even though they've got games they should win there, I mean, you got Texas, you get a bounce back against Arkansas State, we know that. But then, should you stumble at USC, you've got a stretch of 3 games, which if you stumble at USC, it could just snowball.
Yeah.
Because Minnesota can get you.
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota can get you. And Washington, as much as they are nowhere near what they were last year, they've hit the transfer portal pretty well.
Well, there's a lot of good guys that followed Fish from Arizona, from a pretty good Arizona team. That cupboard's not completely bare.
No.
It's nowhere near as good as they were last year, but I don't think Michigan is as near as good as they were last year either.
Not even close.
This game is in a place. I give Washington 7 points just being at home.
Yeah.
So if Michigan ends up winning by, let's say, 10, they would have won by 17 or more.
Yes.
At Michigan Stadium, as opposed to going on the road and playing in Seattle. So that one could be closer than I think that they're anticipating right now.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, you give Washington, all Washington needs is a chip in a chair. You give them an opportunity to stay in there. If they're in it in the fourth quarter, and it's a close game, Michigan's in trouble.
Yeah, that home field is legit. Just ask Oregon. That's a legit home field.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I can see this being a team that easily could end up barely bowl eligible. But I don't see a path to them, unlike a lot of people who are saying, and like you said, 11-1. I think that's a reach. I can see a path to 10-2. I don't see them knocking off Oregon or Ohio State this year.
As
Texas, given their running back situation, I could see the potential if they can control the game and keep Texas quarterbacks off the field.
So you haven't heard the interview I had with Zack yet. No. Zack's got Michigan going 11-1 and playing Ohio State back-to-back weeks in Columbus and then in Indianapolis. And he makes an interesting argument on it that Oregon's travel schedule leading up to Michigan is brutal.
It is.
And so he makes an interesting argument there with that. So it'll be very interesting to see where Oregon is at that point in the schedule, especially if they beat Ohio State in Eugene earlier in the season. Like, let's say they go into that game undefeated and then Michigan's undefeated and Michigan beats them, and then everybody's got at least one loss in the Big Ten other than them.
Well, other than them and Rutgers, because Rutgers is going to be undefeated.
Yeah, that's a very real possibility. They're next, by the way. So
that just creates all kinds of chaos.
It does. It really does. And because there's no divisions anymore, it's kind of wild. I mean, you really could get we've been talking about how weak the West is. We might have a scenario because of scheduling that the second team that gets into the Big Ten championship really is not the second best team in the conference. It's just based off schedule. And so this is going to be incredibly interesting this season, and we're going to be here for all of it here at the OHL podcast. If you are a fan of that team up north and you want to dunk on us, try to dunk on us in the comment section.
Bring it.
Have at it. We are here for all of that smoke. And if you're a Buckeye fan and you wanna dunk on them, let's have it in the chat. Let's make this one a lively one down in the chat below. But before you do that, do us a big favor. hit the thumbs up, give this video a like. If you haven't, subscribe to the channel. It really does help us as we continue to build our community here at the OHL podcast. And if you are subscribed, make sure you ring that bell so you get notified every time we go live. We are going to be doing much more live shows this season. Last year we did one, and this year we're going to be doing
At
least 4, if not 5, every single week, especially now that we have more hosts. So there's a lot of opportunity for you to participate in what we do on a nightly basis almost here at the OHL podcast. So we want you to make sure that you don't miss it and that you are a part of that. So ring the bell. Chris, anything else about those cheaters up north?
I have no words. Just know the hammer is coming.
Fisher-Price hammer, as they like to say.
No Fisher-Price. We're talking a sledge.
Thor's hammer. It's coming. It's not going to, if it does come,
it'll come at the least convenient time for them.
Oh, really? That would be hilarious, actually. Oh, I can't wait. This season's going to be a lot of fun.
Week before the Ohio State game or a week before the Oregon game.
This season's going to be a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much, boys and girls. We'll be back. Rutgers is next. They are on deck. Surprise team of 2024 will be Rutgers. Make sure you check that one out. Till next time, Chris. OH.
I-O.
Go Bucks.